Patricia has come from Anchorage, and I think she feels pretty comfortable here with the weather. She always has a beautiful anorak. I mean, that's what I call it, but she has a different name for it from Alaska. So let me tell you about Patricia a little bit. I have this off your website. I'm not going to read everything because it's really, really long. But anyway, she is an Inupiat Eskimo, born and raised in Nome, Alaska, and serves as the executive director of the Alaska Native Science Commission, a public, not-for-profit corporation. The ANSC provides a linkage for creating partnerships and communication between science and research and Alaska Native communities. She previously served as the administrator of the Institute for Circumpolar Health Studies at the University of Alaska Anchorage, executive director of the Alaska Community Development Corporation, local government program director with the University of Alaska Fairbanks, and director of employment and training for the North Pacific Rim Corporation. Please give her a warm welcome. It's a lot.
Thank you, Lori. So I really hate lecturing from a podium, so I like to do things in traditional talking circles. So I'm going to pretend that we're all in our talking circle here, and that we're all part of that circle in love, in joy, in harmony with one another. Let me start over again by, first of all, thanking and honoring the people whose traditional homelands we stand upon. I ask your permission to speak on your lands. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I give thanks and honor the Creator for giving us this beautiful day, this beautiful country that we're in. It's just like home to me. So thank you very much for making me feel so welcome, so much a part of your land. And my brothers and sisters, thank you very, very much from my heart. I stop and I honor all of my elders who are here, recognize you for all of the wisdom that you have brought to all of us. And I remember all of our ancestors who have come before us and who are always present with us every day. Thank you all very much for again welcoming me to this beautiful land. I've had a great chance over the last few days to talk with a lot of people. I know so many people are interested and have asked me about the Alaska Native Science Commission. We've been around for more than 20 years. We do a lot of very interesting things, and it seems like some of the things that you're looking at doing, I hope I can help provide some of that information about how we've started our own research institute, how we really are more in charge of the kinds of research that happens within our communities. Unfortunately, Lori asked me to talk about climate change. So if you want to hear about the Science Commission, you'll have to invite me back again so I can tell you more about what we're doing at the Commission, the kinds of projects that we're involved in. So let me tell you a little bit about myself. My name, first of all, my English name, Patricia, is not my real name. That's not how people know me. My Inupiaq name is Sikwana, and that's how my people know me. Sikwana is a name that was given to me by my mother and by my aunties. It's a name of a girl who died very early in her life, and that I was given the honor and the responsibility to live my life, not only for myself, but for this other young girl. And I will tell you that it changes the kind of person that you are when you know who you are, where you come from, and what your responsibilities are. So our names are really important to all of us. But also, tell me if I'm really too loud for you guys. I was a cheerleader for like 12 years for the Nome High Nanooks. So if I get too loud, somebody in the back give me a sign and I'll try to keep it down a little bit. Anyhow, my people come from these places here. Over on your left-hand side is the island called King Island. And many of you might know this. It's one of the places in Alaska that's been recognized quite a bit for a number of good and not so good reasons. It was one of the first communities that actually had to relocate in the early 60s. Not for the same reasons that we're talking about today, climate change, but because of economic reasons, their school closed. And when the school closed, all the kids had to move into another community, into Nome. So all of my relatives from King Island moved into Nome, which you see over on the other side, right on the Bering Sea. So I grew up as a child of the Bering Sea, hearing that, loving that sound every day. But it made a real big difference in the life of those King Island people, that it changed who they were. They lost many of their traditions, certainly their homelands. A lot of the songs and dances had to be relearned many years later because of them relocating into an entirely different community. And they were looked upon very differently in our communities because they were the King Islanders. They weren't the people from the Nome community. So I tell you these stories and some of my history so you'll understand the kinds of things that we're facing now in climate change and what that is doing to our communities that are looking at having to move. I always like to start with a little bit of a picture about where we come from because people don't recognize that Alaska is huge. If you put this state of Alaska over the United States, it literally stretches from coast to coast. Alaska is a huge place. We have everything from Arctic conditions way up in the north to forest areas down in the south. So we're looking at all different kinds of lands and environments and peoples. You can see that we have various culture groups that are all part of that as well. My hometown is way over at the furthest northwestern tip of Alaska. You can see Nome way out there close to Russia. And we can't even see Russia from Nome, just by the way. I know everybody has to have that joke at least once. But the other thing that's significant about Alaska, most people don't understand, is that more than 50% of the coastline of the entire United States is in Alaska. We live by a lot of the water, and many of our communities, as a matter of fact, 85% of our communities are coastal communities. So you can see that the water is a real significant part of who we are and where we come from. We also see the world from a kind of a different perspective because we're way up here at the top of the world. We're up at the Arctic Circle. And you can see that opening of the Arctic Ocean, some of the things that we're looking at because of climate change, is going to have a huge impact on all of our communities across the Arctic. And I will tell you this now because people still don't get this. What happens in the Arctic is just a harbinger of what is to come for every place else in the rest of the world. That we are indeed, as they say, the canaries in the coal mine, that we are the people who are seeing these kinds of impacts. I'll also tell you that long before President Obama came to visit us in Alaska just last month, we've been talking about climate change. Our people have been talking about climate change for the last 40 or 50 years. It takes Western science a long time to catch up to the traditional knowledge that comes from people who live closest to the land. We see the smallest changes that are happening around us. And so we've been talking about it for a while. And it didn't use the words climate change, but we knew when our uncles were telling us that the ice was really changing around us, that the animals were changing, the weather was changing, that these were all indicators of climate issues. So these are just a few of the things I'm going to talk to you about today, and I'll sort of go through each of these different things as we come to them. But I always like to show some of the pictures so you can see the reality of what we live with every single day, that these are the kinds of conditions that we have to experience, of our hunters trying to hunt out on sea ice that is no longer there, and the kinds of terrible things that have happened in our communities, the loss of life that really and truly is happening. There's almost none of us who haven't had a family member or a friend who's gone out hunting or whaling and just doesn't come back home. They fall through the ice and they're gone. It's maybe to be found and maybe not. I want to start first by looking at one of the things that has been put together, came out last year, the National Climate Assessment, and there's a reason that I want to go through this. For the very first time, the National Climate Assessment, done by the United States, included a tribal chapter, the very, very first time that has ever happened. And so a lot of us spent a lot of time making sure that tribal issues were covered as part of this national climate assessment. And I think that's really important because it came from our Indigenous communities. It came from our mouths, our hearts, so we could tell what was happening in our own lands. So the National Climate Assessment looked at some of these things. That Alaska has indeed already warmed an average of 3 degrees Fahrenheit. May not sound like a lot, but that is a huge difference in the temperatures worldwide. It's done things like, one of the things that we noticed first off was at our traditional ice cellars where we store all of our food. We didn't have a lot of refrigerators up north, so our refrigerator was in the ground. So that all of our ice cellars were beginning to sweat, were beginning to melt. And this is from a few decades ago. So that was one of our first indicators that there was a real change in the permafrost, that the ground was indeed warming up. So you can see some of these things that are happening in our communities. We've also, in Siberia, they've had some record highs there as well. And I've just noticed a few of those here as well. Of course, there are some real serious consequences that come from that, from human health issues, damage to all of our roads, our sewer and water systems, our highways, the airports, all of these things that are built on permafrost. What happens when all that permafrost is beginning to go? So I'm going to show you some pictures as we go forward with this. So here's some of the changes that you can see. So these are real pictures. These aren't, this isn't National Geographic. These are pictures from our own communities of things that are happening. You can see the erosion that has occurred in many of our communities. In some of them that are already looking at moving, some that are in the process of moving, because their homes, their schools are literally falling into the sea. This is what's going on. You can see that we've tried a lot of different things. We've had the Army Corps of Engineers came in and put in what they call riprap. It's an iron grating that they tried to put along all of the shoreline to keep it from further eroding. The first storm took out all of that riprap, so that is gone. We've tried a lot of different things so far. None of them have really worked very effectively. There's another community, one is in Kivalina, but we've got lots of communities that are going through exactly the same kind of concerns and issues. This one is in Shishmaref. This one was actually taken a few years ago, and these buildings are now gone. And I show you this because you can see we used to have sea ice that would form all across our communities, the front of the communities, all of our waterways. And that would protect us from the storms, from the water, the waves coming into our villages. And that sea ice just isn't there anymore. It's gone. The temperatures are too warm. The sea ice has melted. It's moved further and further off, so that it's not there to protect us anymore. Some of the health issues that we're seeing now because of the climate change. You can see we are worried about our drinking water. That has become an issue. In the photo down below, that's from a community called Newtalk, where their river system has now totally invaded their community. It's one of the first communities that is actually now moving. They've developed a new site. They're starting to move some of their villages or their village people and communities already there. But this totally destroyed their water system. And so everything there was gone. We're seeing changes that are happening in lots of other ways as well. Foodborne illnesses, parasites that are being found, milder winter temperatures. One of the interesting things is that we're seeing more and more infestations of different kinds of insects. And I don't know if that's something that everybody else is experiencing, but we see a lot more mosquitoes. We've had more wasps, those kinds of things that really are coming now as part of changes in our ecosystem and environment. So, what is this friendly creature here? Beaver, right? Okay. So, why is this beaver something that we should be concerned about? I can tell you where I grew up in Nome, we had no beaver there. There were no beaver in our community at all when I was growing up there. And now we are overrun with beaver. The good news is we've learned to make really cool beaver hats. So, but there's a lot of things that come along with this beaver. So why do you guys think? Why do we have beaver up in Nome now? Why are there beaver in the Arctic? What? They're setting up new areas? Yeah? What else? What else? Yeah? So all of these are reasons why. Because the beaver never used to have anything to eat. We didn't have trees up north. The tree line has moved up so much higher into the Arctic that there now are shrubs, large willow trees that the beaver now have something to eat. And so they've moved up not only into Nome, but even up into Kotzebue, and I've heard that Barrow has begun to see beaver in their areas as well. Now this is really significant because the beaver change a lot of things, as you all know. They change the whole habitat for the moose, for the fish, for the people, everything. So this little critter here has made a big difference. It also has brought us concerns about giardia in places that we never had to worry about our drinking water before. It was always pure and clean. Now this little guy has made us really be more concerned because giardia has become a problem. So obviously looking at the sea ice, you can see the sea ice has made a real change. We've even had some of our hunters up in Barrow, the whalers, who have gone out and had to be rescued by search and rescue. These are guys who know the land totally well. They exactly know what they're doing, but the ice shifted so quickly that it just drifted offshore before they were able to get off, and they had to come back in through search and rescue. Our own traditional hunters. So this is something that even we can't even react quickly enough to. That you know that the sea ice loss is just becoming more and more apparent all over the Arctic. Over here on the right-hand side, you can see all of these walrus. This was a picture very recently taken where there are thousands of walrus that have now moved onto land because they can't find the ice that they used to go float on, and that's where they would haul out and rest be able to take a little snooze, catch their seal, whatever they're looking for. But now they all have to go onto land. And there are thousands of them on this one particular haul out because there's no ice for them to go and haul out onto. Here's another thing that we're seeing. This is called winter icing, the rain icing. You know, when it gets really hot and then really cold, freezes, cools, and it's just, we have that cycle now all of the time where it gets warm and cold. And what that does is creates this huge layer of ice over all of our tundra areas. And why that is important to us is because all of our animals feed from the grass, from the lichen. So this has become a real problem in Siberia. Over some of my relatives over in the Russian Far East said that they've lost more than 1 million of their reindeer because of this icing condition, because the animals can't break through that thick ice to get down to feed. So this again is one of the things that we're seeing. Erosion, I have again shown you some of the pictures that are happening, the impacts of the storms on our coastal communities. And one of the most important thing is, so how are we going to move all of these communities, and do we even want to move? What happens? What if you are living here or in New York City and somebody told you you had to move someplace else? Nobody really wants to do that when your ancestors have been there for 10,000 years, when your whole culture is there on that land, when these erosion, these storms are literally wiping out your burial grounds, your sacred grounds. We're having our grave sites that are literally being washed away because of this erosion that's happening within our communities. We try to get to the bodies of our ancestors before they're gone. But again, these are real conditions. These are the kinds of things that we're living through every day. That we have, this is a report that came from the GAO, the Government Administration Office, that says that we had 3 communities right now that are moving, that have looked at lands to be able to move. 184 other communities that are looking at or being affected right now by flooding and erosion, and 12 that are seeking to relocate. I was going to talk a little bit about this one community, Newtok. We've worked with them quite a lot over the last 20-some years at the Science Commission. They're the first community that is, as I said, literally starting to move their community. They swapped some of their native lands, their traditional lands, with the federal government so that they could move a little further inland. And they've begun the process of moving. But as you all know, boy, that's a hard decision. It's a really tough thing. It's created some real issues, some real divisiveness, even within their own communities, because those kinds of discussions are hard to have. And there's some strong feelings, especially between the youth and the elders. So I want to make sure that people understand that these are hard decisions. It's not just if we get the money, you can go someplace. Boy, they're tough conversations. And what do you really want to do about it? Lots of our communities are just saying we're not going to move. It's just not going to happen. We'll do what we have to do. So here's some of the things that they looked at. They had to work with so many agencies. It was just incredible. They couldn't move to this new town site because they didn't have a school, because they didn't have an airport, because they didn't have sewer and water, and nobody would come who would be the first one there because they didn't have all of these other things. So it's been a real difficult process for them to try to figure that all out. And of course, the truth of the matter is there's no federal agency that's out there that's going to write us a check for $250,000 or $500,000 to move a village of 200 people. So what are we going to do about it? These are some of the questions that we're asking ourselves. What are we going to do? I should show you this picture because this is very real to me, because that's my brother's house. This is in Nome, where in Nome, this is one of the many storms. You know, When I was first starting research a long time ago, we used to call them 100-year storms. And then we started calling them 50-year storms, and then 20-year storms. Now we've had so many of them, I can't even count the number of storms that we've had in my community now. But this, again, is very real to me. In Nome, they have built up a seawall, a rock seawall, that protects now most of the front street part of town, the main street. But this is at the end, the other end of town. So these are the kinds of conditions that we're living with. Ocean acidification, of course, we all know that this is happening to not only to us, but to critters, all of the animals that we depend upon. We're seeing some things that are already happening within our ecosystem and with our things like crab and fish that are already beginning to change because of acidification. We are really worried about food security. This is one of our fish drying racks up in Nome. This was from a couple of years ago, where you can see this fish doesn't look as tasty as it usually does. That's because we had so much rain that our fish could never dry. So we, of course, you learn to do other things. You do more smoking, you do more canning, different stuff. But food security for us is, again, a major issue. Glaciers are melting, everybody knows that. People talk a lot about the Greenland ice sheet and what that's going to do to the melting of the waters all across the Arctic, but what they don't realize, Alaska has so many glaciers that the output of water that will come from the melting in our glaciers in Alaska is more than from the Greenland ice sheet. So that's, again, another one of the things that people don't really think about, but is certainly a concern to us. All of this affecting our global sea level rise and all of those other issues. Permafrost, I talked about already. You can see some of the sloughing over on the right-hand side. That used to be land. And this is just some of the permafrost sloughs that we see now. So again, if you're looking at places of airports or highways or roads, all of these things, so these are the conditions that we're seeing now in the permafrost areas. Wildfires. On the left-hand side, I want to point out that is the Trans-Alaska Pipeline. That's where all the oil flows from the Arctic. And you can see the wildfire. That's right behind. We have had, this last summer was the second largest fire season we've ever seen in the state of Alaska. Almost 7 million acres of land burned up in this fire. So I tell people, this is like if you take the state of Massachusetts and burn it, that's the kind of fire season that we had. We lost so much during that. And what does that do to not only to our lands and everything around us, but certainly to the health impacts of all of those communities that have to breathe that air and try to live in those conditions. Again, I put this up. This is one of our communities in the interior in Huslia. You can't see that, the thermometer there, but it reads over 100 degrees. And this community had more than 3 weeks of 100-degree temperatures, and you can see one of the results. Luckily, they didn't lose their town because they were prepared for the season. But we've had a lot of spruce bark beetle infestation all across the Arctic, so that all of our trees have dried up and become tinder boxes for these kinds of fires. We're seeing more lightning strikes than we've ever seen, and the lightning strikes are one of the things that exacerbate all of the fire conditions. This is a Tundra Fire from up in my area up in Nome. Tundra fires are really different because they burn, we don't have all of the trees like they have in Southeast, so Tundra fires burn underground. And they can burn underground for months or years period of time. So it changes a whole lot of the tundra and the kinds of land that we try to subsist upon, and all of our animals do as well. I always show this slide because people don't think about this. It's not one of the things that's high on the radar of a lot of researchers, and it is methane. So It is also one of the huge problems of climate change, because all of these gases that have been building up over thousands of years period of time, we are now becoming a source of these methane releases. We're not just a sink anymore for everything coming into our lands and staying there, but now because of the permafrost melt, we're becoming a source, an outgassing of these methane releases. In Siberia, I've seen some of the pictures of the researchers there, where one of the scientists was just lit a match over the earth there, and it just went because of the methane that was coming from especially those areas around Siberia. So I don't want to just stop with all of the terrible things that are going on. So what the heck are we doing about all of this? We really have been looking at this. Here's some of the things that we're doing to adapt. We've looked at a lot of relocation plans. We've had a lot of serious conversations, looked at seawalls that may or may not work, obviously looked at escape and evacuation plans. We've had some what we call immediate action working groups, and these are our own Indigenous communities that are working together, trying to find solutions. We're also looking at working with some of our scientists and researchers at hazard mapping, different things that we can look at. Incorporating our own traditional knowledge. We've got some tagging programs that have been going on. My organization has a traditional knowledge project that we've been doing for about the last 15 or so years that helps our communities look at ways of survival. We've got use of satellites. We actually have many of our whalers now go on and look at their GPS when they're going out whaling. So we've learned to use not only our traditional knowledge, but the knowledge that we gain every single day. Because as we all know, traditional knowledge is dynamic. It's living. Everything that I learn is part of traditional knowledge as well. And most importantly, we're also beginning to do more of our own research, or our own publications. We're not relying on everybody else to do it for us. So, okay, here's another little story, another question for you guys. This robin. In the interior of Alaska, one of the interesting things we heard from the elders there was that the robin song has changed. So why do you think the robin song has changed? I couldn't hear it. It's exactly what our elders told us, is that it was a warning that the robin comes to us to tell us that things are changing. Our scientists, the Western scientists, also tell me that it's because climatia or migration patterns have changed, and that robins are coming from other areas that they didn't come from before, so some new songs are being introduced into the community of robins in our area. So again, these are some of the things that we try to pick up on when our community tells us something is going on. We try to figure out, so why is that happening? And then we work with other researchers to sort of help us to answer those questions. So here are some of the cool things that we're looking at, because we know that we can't just, we have to look at modern technology and ways that we can operate better. In Kotzebue, you can see this wind farm now that is now supplying more than 25% of their energy needs from their wind farm. We have quite a few wind farms across Alaska now that really are beginning to help us defer some of the huge costs that heating is one of the major issues. Energy issues in Alaska are unbelievable. When you're having to pay $1,000 a month just to heat your home, that's unbearable, and we're losing a lot of our elders in our communities because they can't afford their homes anymore. So we're trying to find other ways of making energy efficiency work for them. My organization, the Bering Straits Corporation in Nome, built their whole new building, even way up in the Nome area, that's all got solar panels. So we're looking at technology that will help us. And one of the projects that we've been working on with with a village in the interior in Igiagik. Is their first ever hydrokinetic water turbine that's installed in the Kwijak River there. So that just came online during this last season. So these are some of the kinds of things that we're working on. Again, these are some of the issues or some of the strategies that we've used. We all know that when we built our houses before, there were reasons we built them the way we did, where they faced the direction they did, so that the wind wouldn't get to them, so that the snow drift would cover the part of the house to keep it warm. So we're going back to using some of that knowledge in building our homes. The Cold Climate Housing Research Center at UAF is actually using a lot of our traditional ways in building new houses using old ancient wisdom and technology. Again, just saw a few of the things. Dog teams is one of the things. My nephews now, instead of relying on snow machines, are going back to dog teams because, you know, our dogs were really smart. If the ice wasn't safe, they would stop you. The dogs would stop before you got out onto those unsafe conditions. Snow machine will not do that for you, but our dogs were really smart, so we're going back to doing that. So here's a couple of the other things that we've been working on at the Science Commission. I know a lot of you have had the same problems in your communities that we have. A lot of our teachers that come in and out that don't stay very long in our communities. And we wanted to be able to not only teach our teachers, but also to have our kids learn from our own ways. So that when people look at my Kusbuk, it's not just pretty. This is a lesson in history, it's a lesson in science, it's a lesson in mathematics. All of these things are part of the way that we traditionally make our outfits. I'll also tell you this is a fancy one, so this is not the it's not the traditional our traditional parking, but they're built around our own science and they really are meant as lesson plans. So we started to create some of our own training. We wanted to work our kids to know how to think, learn, and teach from our own traditional ways of knowing. So we worked with this company called WGBH, Boston Public Television. They're the same people who developed Sesame Street. Am I getting feedback? Okay. Okay, so they're the same people who developed Sesame Street. We worked with them and we developed an online training program that our kids can now go to learn lessons from our elders, to learn lessons from our native scientists. That my nephew is one of the people who's featured as one of the teachers on this. He went to Stanford and came back home and teaching at Bartlett, one of our schools now. But he goes into stories from Grandma to teach lessons of science and math to his students. So these are the kinds of things that we wanted to build in our own communities, our own ways of knowing, learning, and teaching. And we can do that now. Another thing, this is not one of our programs at the Science Commission, but it was built off of our traditional knowledge website, our first database that we did of traditional knowledge. It's a program now that the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium is operating called the LEO program, the Local Environmental Observers Network, where all of the people, the observers, the finest observers of the land, the people who live there, can go online and say, hey, guess what? I just saw this fish that has these lesions all over it. So what the heck's up with that? What's going on with that? So they can take pictures of it, they can put it onto the website, and we can hook them up with scientists and other people who can give them some reasons. It can also show things that are happening first in our areas, that we, again, we know when things are occurring faster than other folks. So there's now a network for that, and believe it or not, there's now an app for that. So Leo has just now announced that they have an app that's going to be coming out, so people can observe and input, not only from Alaska, but they're also reaching out into Canada and Russia and other places as well. So this is a really great, a great project. We've been doing another one called a community partnership for working with our communities, with researchers at the university. And again, instead of the researchers coming to us to say this is what we want to do, we go to our communities and say this is what our communities want. What can you researchers do to help our communities? So the university is now working with us to actually work on projects that the community wants to have implemented. So it's not only community-based, it's really community-initiated, community participatory research. And that's the way we think it should be. We just started another NOAA-funded project that literally is just getting off the ground with a number of partners. It's supporting resilient communities. Okay. Another one that we just finished working on with a lot of folks, maybe some of them even here in this room. This is with a bunch of tribal scientists, native scientists, who started to put together some guidelines for how people should work, how agencies should work well with our communities. So this is guidelines for working on traditional knowledge. And these are some of another project that we're working on with our folks at Aleut International and some other organizations called, it's a community-based assessment of carbon, black carbon. We just started this project as well because black carbon, again, is a huge issue in the Arctic. It's what our community has always called that dirty snow. You know, people always talked about the dirty snow, and that was the soot that's coming from all of these places everywhere, from China, from Japan, from all other places, and settling onto our lands. So we're trying to figure out where that's coming from and to find ways that we can help to mitigate that. We're also doing a lot of international work. We've worked with a thing called Many Strong Voices, which is a UN project that we've been working on for about the last 7 or 8 years. We have another program called the Arctic Alliance. So if you want to find out everything that's going on in the Arctic, you can sign up for our website and get everything, the news that's happening everywhere in the Arctic. So you can go on and get it all in one place. We're working with the Arctic Circle, many of these different projects. So one of the things that we also recognized was that when you look at our pictures in Alaska, then we saw this other one from the Seychelles Islands, about as far away as you can get from the Arctic. And look at how similar they are. And that was when a few years ago we really started recognizing that we had to start working together. So we've begun now an international, a global network on climate change, a global network of Indigenous people. And we've been working together now. We have a secretariat that works with all of us, where our voices are much stronger because we've decided to unite in our efforts. This is a global summit that I did on climate change a few years ago, the first ever Indigenous Peoples Global Summit on Climate Change. That happened in 2009. I'm happy to say we have another one starting for next year, for the fall of next year, the next step in global people getting together and talking about our issues. I'll let you read the quote there, but I wanted to share with you the picture on the bottom is my mom. It's a portrait that one of our very famous artists in Alaska had done. My mom passed away a few years ago at the beautiful age of 96. So she had a good long life, and she was an amazing woman. She always liked the story that I could never have afforded this artist to do this portrait. So in my youth, I used to be, I was a drummer in a rock and roll band for a long time. And he wanted my drum set, so I traded him my drum set for him doing this beautiful portrait of my mom. So she always liked that story. And up at the top, the reason that I do everything that I do, these are my 3 beautiful granddaughters. And that's what this is all about. Truthfully, it's about providing hope for our next generations, for them to know that we are a strong and resilient people, that we really can survive all of these things as our ancestors did for 10,000 years before us. So before I move, I want to also have an opportunity for one of the things that I take most important in my life is to help mentor our young people. And so I'm very honored to invite one of our young people from Alaska to come up and talk a little bit about her community. I try to do this every time that I get invited to a keynote, is to make sure that one of our young people is trained, to make sure that our young people are the ones that we're passing on this information to, and they know how to do all of this as well. So this is Andrea Sanders. She's Yupik, and she's going to tell her a little bit about herself.
Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia, for allowing me to be up here, and to Lori for inviting us. And I want to echo what Patricia said. It's wonderful to be on the lands here with the Salish and Kootenai tribes. It reminds us of home, so we feel very welcomed. And my colleague Heather and I, we were being adventurous, and we went out to hot springs on our first day. So really blessed to have all of the natural surroundings that you have here. What I said was that I'm Yupik. My family is from Quinnahock, which is also on the Bering Sea coast, but probably 850 miles south of Nome, where Patricia is from. I grew up in the community of Bethel, which is a hub community. My English name is Andrea Sanders, and I work as the director of the Alaska Native Policy Center at First Alaskans Institute. But more importantly, I'm speaking to you all as a tribal member of the Native village of Quinnahock. So I'm going to share a little bit of the story of how climate change is affecting our community, and a really amazing project that we're initiating as a result of that. So just quickly, I won't take too much of your time, but I wanted to share a little bit of our story. About 5 or 6 years ago, one of our community leaders was walking along the beach, and he started noticing some really amazing artifacts that he was finding along the coast. And he had heard about some archaeologists that had been doing work in Kodiak Island and Barrow and other parts of the state. And so he just did a cold call and called this archaeologist and said, I think you should come down here. I think there's some pretty remarkable artifacts that we're starting to find along our coast as the erosion is taking away feet, up to 30 feet each year due to the erosion that Patricia was talking about. So that archaeologist, Rick Knick, he's now with the University of Aberdeen, came down and right away started finding the funding that they needed to start a world-class archaeological dig about 5 miles from the heart of Quinnahock on the ocean. So you can see the map there, similar to what Patricia was showing you. Quinnahock is that little black dot. Right now we're a strong community of about 600 folks. And that's one of the larger villages. We have, a runway. We just got a multi-million-dollar school there. We have wind turbines. We have beach access roads. So although some communities are facing relocation, I think Quinnahock is probably going to be one of the communities that other villages possibly relocate to. So Nunatlaq, that's the name of the site. It means old village. And as I alluded to, our leadership, it's actually through our village corporation, Qanakhduk Incorporated. They went ahead and formed a nonprofit, Qanakhduk Heritage, which is the main partner with the University of Aberdeen. And this project has been quoted as one of the most important research projects undertaken in Yupik territory. What they've done with the carbon dating has proven that our people have been there since around 1300 AD. Really, the permafrost, also what Patricia mentioned, preserved so many of the artifacts. They remained intact. So they're finding 500-year-old artifacts. They even found a village site and a men's house dating back 500 years. And they're finding Yupik masks, baskets, clay pots, bentwood bowls, carving tools, harpoons. They have a collection of over 50,000 items. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. I'm sure we've already lost so much due to that erosion, but they're working against time at this point. They also found fishing lures, human and animal remains, and what I thought was really interesting were they finding these little wooden carvings, and they had different faces all over them. And we were told by some of the elders with that historic traditional knowledge that those were actually called shapeshifters, and that our traditional healers and that our shamans had the ability to change their forms. And that was completely new information for the young people and the community members to have a glimpse into that part of our history. So really, like I was saying, that the climate change is changing many aspects of our ways of life, but I wanted to highlight something that's remarkable. The collection that they have been putting together was shared with the community members, and it was a chance for us to share our oral histories in helping identify the artifacts. The artifacts are going to be sent to the University of Aberdeen and preserved, studied, recorded, and the plan is that they will return back to Alaska in 2017. So I know that there's a fundraising effort now so we can have a small museum in our village of Quinhagak, and I think AVCP out of Bethel is also looking at some funding so that they can be brought back home to our people. This has been identified as the largest collection of pre-contact Yupik artifacts in the world. So what they're finding date back before we had even Russian contact. And you know, in our Yupik tradition, it's really been embedded in us that we leave the things of the past alone. If there are old ancient grave sites, or if there are things you find, we were told don't touch it, just leave it alone, leave it as it is. We don't want to disturb that. But our local leadership really felt strongly that about 100 years ago, when the Moravian Church came to our village, that the Moravian Church took so much. They took our language, they stopped our dancing, they, you know, made our children go away to boarding schools. And so they said, you know what, no more. The erosion, it can't take what's left. And so they decided to seek the permission of the tribal council and the community, and got the go-ahead to take this endeavor in identifying the artifacts. And for me, that's what's really significant, because my siblings are there, my grandparents, my mom, and so when they started identifying these artifacts, the young kids, the middle school and elementary school children, went to the tribal council and sought permission to bring back native dancing. It had been gone for 100 years, and they felt that sense of identity, that sense of history, that cultural connection resurging. So I call it our cultural renaissance. It's been an opportunity for us to reclaim our native ways of knowing and being. And so the children created new songs and dances, and then the neighboring villages would remind us and share our songs and dances back with us. And it's just been a complete shift in the mindset of our young people. So one of the messages I wanted to make sure I hit on was that global warming is threatening the loss of our cultural heritage. And these are some things that we need to remember, that as we look to relocate, as we look to change the ways that our communities are coming together and facing these tough decisions, that it's our people that really need to be at the center of the decision making. My grandmother's house, this isn't the photo of it, but it's a similar situation. My grandmother's house had to be relocated. It was right along the river, near the runway, and the erosion was happening so severely along the Keynote River that they moved the runway to higher land, and they actually had to pick up and move my grandmother's house as well. And her whole life changed. It wasn't a very far move, but from living right there on the river, and her husband, my grandfather, had built the house, and having it move closer to town, you know, everything changed. When I would go to visit her, her whole demeanor, her spirit was not the same as it once was. Just finally, I wanted to make sure to mention that it's our village corporation leaders in consultation with our tribal elders that are working as partners with scientists in the decision making. They're helping them identify when it's appropriate to dig and how to preserve the site and the artifacts that they're finding and what they should and shouldn't do with the finds. And like I said, this is really bringing new hope to our community. It's bringing a call to come back home. I think for a lot of our people, you know, we go away to school, our elders tell us, go get an education, and it's so easy to just get on your career track and to, you know, start a life anywhere in the lower 48, as we call it, or anywhere in the world. But as we start to gain this rich history back, I think it's really bringing a lot of us back closer to home and creating this new sense of cultural pride and where we come from and wanting to be a part of what's happening. In the Yupik region where I come from, we're probably about 40,000 people. And so that's powerful. That doesn't maybe sound like a lot in comparison to other tribes or the general population of the US, but that's really powerful. And many of them, Yupik is the first language, and they hunt and fish, and they live off the land. And so for us to come home, it means so much, because it means that, you know, the leadership and the decision making that's happening, we're going to be having the Western skills and the vocabulary and the negotiating ability that maybe they didn't have. So I just wanted to end on that note.
I'll be honest with you, you know, because I lecture all over the world. I always tell people, like when I'm in New York, I'll tell you, I worry about you guys in Manhattan more than I worry about us, because we know how to take care of ourselves. I don't know what the heck those people are going to do there. I really don't know. That's why I try to spread this message so that other people get it. They understand that, boy, what's happening to us is going to be in your backyard before you know it. So, yeah. Anyhow, thank you all very much.
You guys are so awesome.